Thanks everyone for joining for this edition of one of the Zero to Hero webinars. For those of you who are new, I like to do these like on a bi-weekly cadence. Obviously, I like to think of myself as an enterprise sales expert, but enterprise sales also touches so many other domains. So last week we talked about security. We've also had a guest talk about LinkedIn social selling. I was telling Matt in a few weeks we'll talk about legal as well as part of how you think about founder-led sales. But today I'm really excited for this session because we have Matt Kim, who's a CEO of Zipsy. They specifically focus on helping founders think about their overall design philosophy and approach. So not just the product or the website, but also how it all comes together with collateral and just how you show up authentically as a brand that stands out, which we all know is really, really tough this day and age, given how much noise is out there. And so, Matt, I've gotten a sneak peek into Matt's content. I'm really excited for him to review his thoughts on how to leverage great design in your enterprise sales motion. And so he's going to go over that, go over a few examples over 30 to 35 minutes. Feel free to leverage the chat if you have things that come top of mind, and I'll MC the session. And then towards the end, we'll open it up to Q&A so that you all can ask questions that are top of mind for you around the topic of design and how that helps enterprise sales. So with that, Matt, I'll turn it over to you for a quick intro and to dive into the amazing slides you created. And thanks for joining. Really grateful to have you.
Of course. Excited to be here. There's a ton of cool stuff that I want to show, but quick context. So my name is Matt. I'm the CEO of Zipsy. And in terms of my background, I've worked at early stage startups. There's one company called Sensor Tower. They are B2B SaaS products, so very much in that enterprise realm. I joined when it was 40 people. I think now it's around like 300 plus people. I worked at Facebook, so being actually on the enterprise side and seeing how we handle some of the vendors and some of our partners. I ended up also being a founder myself of a venture-backed startup. So I understand the journey of really building that 0 to 1 process and being on that founder side. And then now I'm part of Zipsy, and it's very interesting because I actually used to be a client of Zipsy before. So now I'm on the other side of design.
Super cool. Nice. Okay. So Kaz sold you, and then you were like, this is too good for me not to join.
Yeah, Kaz sold me on the designs, and then Kaz sold me on actually joining Zipsy too.
Awesome.
So definitely got to see both sides of that, which is really neat. So yeah, have a lot of interesting insights that I'm excited to share today. A little bit of context on Zipsy as well. So Zipsy is a design team for technical founders. So we actually work with a lot of VCs like A16Z, Sequoia, and we support their founders with design. So anything from logos, branding, copywriting, building out the website, to actually like designing and building the product as well. And obviously, as we do a lot of that, we primarily work with a lot of B2B companies. So think infrastructure, AI, some crypto projects, B2B SaaS. So as a result of that, we get a lot of interesting learnings coming out of that and a lot of questions and concerns. Like you'll notice that early stage founders have certain concerns, and then once they get to around mid stage, they come back with the same set of concerns that those mid stage companies have. So excited to share some of those learnings with you guys.
Amazing. Let's dive into it.
Awesome. So let me know if you can see my screen. Can you guys see the slides?
Yep, looks perfect.
Awesome. So let me know if that ever gets interrupted as I'm going. But the first question that me and Peter were talking about during this process is, why does great design matter for enterprise customers? Because I think it's a little bit more obvious when you are looking at B2C customers and every single user has, that user experience, but how exactly does it differ and why does it matter for enterprise? And really the key thing is the enterprise market is crowded, especially with AI making, software and coding much, much easier. Design plays a very critical role in breaking through that noise and really standing out. So there's specific strategies and how to implement design correctly when it comes to enterprise, and I'll be walking you through that. One thing to note is, I'm sure Peter talks about this as well, but the lessons here should be used on a case-by-case basis. Like every industry is different, every product is different, and sometimes even depending on who you're talking to, your strategy can be different as well. So I'll give you some of the high level lessons and as well as some of these case by case situations. If you guys have more details, we can definitely go into questions. But the basics of design for enterprise is really there's a different set of challenges. And I'll be covering 4 of those key challenges today. But the first one is there's now multiple stakeholders. You're no longer selling for just one person, one user. There are long sales cycles. It's no longer just see an app on the App Store and download it anymore. Sometimes it could take months. Sometimes I've seen deals take over a year, sometimes 2 years. Overcoming risk aversion. So now there's much more risk for your customers to actually use your product, and then proving that it's worth the switch. So managing multiple stakeholders. So as you guys know, enterprises involve dealing with multiple different personas. So there's definitely way more than the ones listed here. But as an example, there's the decision maker who's actually the main person that's making that decision. There is the end user. So maybe it's the CEO that's making the decision, but it is the engineering team that is actually the user, right? And then there's even the procurement team who gets a final say with things like the budget. But basically, there's multiple different kinds of people. So as a result of that, when you're looking at large enterprises, you can't give a personalized pitch to every employee, and every person is different, as you just saw. So people actually have to love your product, and you're relying on key champions to advocate for you internally. You can think of it as your main point of contact or contacts have to essentially sell for you, sell on your behalf to the rest of the company. For example, even at Zipsy, like we'll sometimes be talking to the head of marketing, and they're the person that came and reached out, but through our conversations, they now have to go pitch to their founder, to their CEO. You may see someone, head of engineering, that now has to go pitch to the rest of the team to really convince them that, hey, this is actually a good product. Let's get on board with it. Let's go on a trial. But at the end of the day, you have to have people pitch for you. Now, as a result of that too, the value proposition needs to be very clear. Think of it this way. If the person that is selling on your behalf is confused in some way, it just makes their job much, much harder for when they now have to pitch for you to the rest of the company. So depending on whatever value proposition you have to make that very, very clear and easy to understand. So the first tip here is to simplify your message. And simplifying is something that we talk quite a bit at Zipsy, from things like the logo to the copywriting to even your website layout. But making things simple is actually very, very difficult and usually takes longer, but simplicity is usually what works and makes you memorable. So here's actually an example. On the left side, you'll notice that there's actually less words, and it says your all-in-one solution for modern websites, but it's actually quite vague. You don't really have a sense of what they do. And I see this all the time for when we're talking to clients. And I feel like the more complex the product is, the more complex the descriptions end up getting. And sometimes people think that this high level, more emotional way of explaining things is easier. But oftentimes, like when I look at this, I don't really understand. So let's say someone on my team is taking this and sending it to me and saying, hey, Matt, we should get this tool. It's like my day's pretty busy. So when I look at this, I'm like, what exactly is this? So now it becomes a higher, mental hurdle to getting to understand. And then this one here is one by Framer. So they say design and publish modern sites at any scale with Framer's web builder. So I've seen companies go much more detailed than this. I've seen companies go a little bit higher level, but now at the very least, I have a sense that, okay, they handle both designing and publishing. And one thing they seem to be emphasizing is the scale. So how big the website is, or the complexities of what's needed to run. It looks like that's a big focus for Framer. So I already have a slightly better sense as opposed to the one on the left side.
Yeah, I love this message because I see the all-in-one solution a ton too. And I think it has to do with the advice that enterprises want to consolidate a lot of their decision making, right? So there was a lot of fear because the economy was bad. Oh, like people don't want to buy point solutions, right? They don't want to buy a niche solution that'll just solve one thing. The best of breed era is over. But I think that's the wrong way of thinking because I still think even in a recessionary environment, enterprise want to be very clear on what you can do, and startups can't do everything. So
Yeah.
I like that you pointed this out. even if the vision is to be a consolidated platform, like as a 10-20% company, you're not going to be that all-in-one solution in the next 1 to 2 years. So being transparent and building that trust is super important.
Yeah, exactly. It's like one thing that we say is for early stage startups, the most important thing for your communication is clarity.
Hmm.
Because, when you're a 10-person team, people don't know you yet. And their first thought is, how can I understand what they actually do? I think
Yeah,
once you get to a much bigger size, let's say you're now your Deal, then they can look at you and say, "Oh, I've heard of Deal. I actually know a little bit of what Deal does." Your
sure.
messaging can adapt, and you have a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah, that's a good point too. This is not like you're setting this in stone for even like two
Yeah,
years, right? Like this is an iterative process. Cool.
exactly. The second point is don't feature dump. And this is right around the stage when I think companies have like more and more functionalities built into their product. So obviously it's very easy when you have one key feature and you're a very early stage company. But once you start adding a few more features, you'll start seeing very interesting ways to showcase everything that you've built. And I think this comes from a place of founders being really excited of what they have and trying to showcase everything. But what it actually does is it distracts your customers from paying attention to the right things. This is something that I also talk about when it comes to resumes. Sometimes you don't need to list all of your experiences because you'd rather have the other person focus on the key things that matter. So here on the left side, you'll see that, Artwork put a lot of different features and functionalities. But not only that, they just put it in like a big block of text. So it's hard to decipher like which one I should even be focusing on. Whereas on the right side here, here's an example where it says, hey, here are the two key things. You save time and, privacy is the other key thing. Now, I'll talk a little bit more of how I would actually make this side even better. But
Hmm.
you'll, as a heads up, you'll notice that, the imagery is actually quite vague, right? Like this doesn't actually relate to time. This doesn't actually relate to privacy. It's almost like a conceptual illustration. There are some very strong ways where you can make that a little bit more relatable with the actual product and imagery, but I'll get to that soon. Quick tease.
So you wouldn't go with the conceptual images, like is what you're saying.
I'd say conceptual, we find that is really good in two main scenarios. So one is if you have anything proprietary and you don't want competitors to actually see it, then I think having something
Mm.
conceptual or almost creating like marketing assets where it looks like a product, but it actually isn't, that can work.
Hmm.
The other one is if you're actually a very new company and you don't really have your product set in stone, then
Yeah.
you can make yourself seem a little bit bigger by having more conceptual illustrations.
Got it. Got it. That's helpful. The other question I have here is on the topic of not focusing too much on the product features and inundating buyers with that. I think one other thing I teach founders within the sales cycle in a deck is to focus on the pain points,
Yeah.
and that will help you then qualify leads for whether or not you can help them. And so I wonder if you also like give that advice on the website. It's, like you can't just give feature after feature. You have to talk about what is the actual problem that you can solve, because then the people who are coming to you hopefully have a little bit more urgency. So I wonder like what you think about that.
Yeah, that's actually something that I learned very early on in my career, where it's usually not the feature. As you mentioned, it's, what problem are you actually solving? And oftentimes there's many different ways to tackle that problem. And I think the key part is how do you actually convey that story? And there's ways to say it in terms of like the wording, but also in terms of the design, which we'll actually get to in a second as well.
Amazing.
But you're right, that the feature usually at the end of the day is not the key selling point.
Cool.
So one more piece on this is one common mistake that I see is founders will take a lot of screenshots from their products and just paste it onto their website.
Mm.
And usually it's a very complex view. Now, what we like to do is we either zoom in on the specific functionality that we want the viewer to be paying attention to, or we actually, as I mentioned before, create a more specific marketing asset that looks like that product, but it's not an actual screenshot. And it really falls into the same line of keeping things simple, making it very easy for your customer to see and understand what you're trying to explain.
Yeah, I like that idea that it doesn't have to be the actual exact product on your website, right? As long as it's conveying the concepts that people are going to interact with. It could
Yeah,
still
yeah,
remain like authentically true to your product. It doesn't have to be the exact same buttons.
Exactly. And especially when things are changing so much,
Yeah,
if you get another better version of your product, then you're gonna have to like keep going back and changing things. So yeah.
cool.
So this is one, a little bit of what you're alluding to, Peter, before, but tailoring your message. So the one common thing that I see is that for very early stage companies, they build and design their story of their product to the end user. So let's say in this case, the technical users. So they start talking about the architecture, the integrations, the capabilities, a lot of the features. This is where the feature conversations come up. But what they realize is that, and I get this all the time, as they go more up market, they realize that it's no longer just the technical people that are buying their product. It's also the executive, the leadership team, which oftentimes they're not as technical. So we've definitely had cases where the website is super, super technical. And, when a leadership member goes and checks out the site, they don't really understand the value prop. It's like,
Hmm.
what exactly does this do for my team and my company? And that makes the process of selling to them much harder. So when it comes to messaging, make sure that you're taking into consideration the types of people that are being involved in your process. In enterprise, I find that it's usually multiple different groups. So here's an example where you talk a little bit more about the outcome or the explanation in very, very simple, easy to understand language. But then you can have a section where it goes much more into the details so that if you have that technical person checking it out as well, they can easily dive in further. But yeah, definitely take into consideration, who's going to be in that process, in that sales process.
That's a good point. Yeah, I talk about this for decks too, actually, like slide
Mm,
decks. A lot of times people will have titles like intro or, like our Series C, Series A funding, right? It doesn't really tell a story. And so
yeah.
I think like if an executive is going to just thumb through your slides without looking at the contents, does your like headline tell a story? So I feel like there's like a parallel here where, the big letters should be outcome driven, whereas the smaller letters can be more technical differentiators.
Yeah. So you're actually hinting at something really good too. Like if I were to make this top copy even better, it would be really highlighting that value prop. So I have a few examples later in the deck as well, but yeah, if you can make it really obvious and make that win really obvious, then it makes it easy for both, the technical and non-technical teams in that example.
Yeah, cool.
So the second piece is around navigating long sales cycles. So you can have a sales cycle that goes from like 1 month to, yeah, like sometimes even like 2 years. And, one thing that they say in enterprise is the rule of seven. And it's based on this marketing principle that customers need to see your brand at least 7 times before they commit to a purchase decision. Now, that's obviously a very, high level blanket statement. Sometimes it could be a rule of three. It could be a rule of 10. It really depends on the type of product that you're offering. But you'll notice that oftentimes there are multiple touch points. It's like I will have many moments where I'll jump on a call with someone and they'll say, "Oh, I've actually heard of you guys before." I've done the same thing on like the customer side where I jumped on a call and said, "Wait, I've seen your logo or your brand before. Were you guys at this conference?" And like that sort of consistency creates some level of like familiarity and trust. So that's one very simple win where once you have a lot of those brand elements very uniform and consistent, it makes it much easier to have those sorts of experiences. So I think websites is a pretty obvious one. Or like if you go to a conference, it's an obvious one. But then sometimes people will make the mistake of not carrying that into the actual like product. Or sometimes in the deck, it'll just be a completely different formatting because marketing and I don't know, let's say the developers worked on two completely different sets of materials. So having that consistency makes it easier for building trust. And one thing that we say is a brand is not just a logo. Like a logo at the end of the day will not get you far just by itself. But what essentially happens is with these long sales cycles, buyers will keep coming back with more questions. It could be different people in the company coming back. I've also had cases where I talked to one person in the company, I talked to another person in the company. They realize that they're both talking to me. They start talking to each other. So there's many touch points that will happen, and this could be across months. But the worst thing that can happen throughout this process is not them coming back for more questions, is that they actually forget about you. you guys have probably had this happen as well, where sometimes you've heard of a product, or maybe you've even used a product, but you just completely forgot the name, like somehow, like one day. So the more inconsistent your brand touch points are, the higher likely that's going to happen. So you want to keep your brand very familiar at every touch point. And here's one of the brands that we worked on. So they are a pretty massive B2B API management company. They raised $170 million, but all the way from their website, their logo, even down to their swag, we created this where it's like this whole concept of ones and zeros. It matches their theme of being very engineer and like product driven. But at the same time, you see this very subtle, solo written on that side.
Nice. I really like this one.
The third one is around overcoming risk aversion. So enterprise companies always want to have innovative solutions to stay competitive, right? Like especially with everything going on with AI right now. I know a lot of people are saying, how can we implement AI? But they're also very risk averse. So it's very important to show credibility upfront very quickly. And basically what happens, actually, that makes sense. So basically what happens is not only is there risk from, let's say, even like a security perspective, but there's risk in their processes breaking, right? People may have already been trained to do something in a certain manner, but if it's very complicated to do something different, things may start breaking. So the more credibility you're able to show, the easier it is for them to say, hey, it's actually not that much risk, or this risk is actually worth it. So an easy one is a track record. So anything to do with case studies, stats, use cases. This is one actually by Solana, where I found theirs very interesting because theirs is live stats. So if you actually go to Solana site, like this scalable, like total transaction number is constantly increasing. So something about that just made me think, wow, like this seems very credible. Solana is an interesting use case because they actually do like go down time to time, but this view itself actually made it seem like it never goes down, and it seems much stronger.
Question on the track record. So what if you don't have a track record, right, in the product? Like how do you think about that? How do you still show social proof?
Yeah, so there's definitely a couple other ways. If there's no actual track record, I'm assuming with no track record, you have no one actually using your product yet, or your product is not even live. There's other ways like using social proof. So if you have people even just testing your product, where maybe they're not like a fully enterprise level person, and the metrics may not reflect that, but if you can even get certain quotes from different people, I think that's quite strong.
What
And
about I often tell founders, like a lot of founders are from very notable places, right? So they have experience at like Meta or Google or Uber or whatever, big tech company we all know. Like, what do you think about that and showcasing some of that prior experience, like from a founder level?
yeah, I would actually consider that as a form of track record. So that's a very good point of putting the logos of what companies the team has actually worked at. The one thing that I would be careful of, which I've seen, is sometimes it would be phrased where it looks like it's not the companies that the founders worked at, but it looks like that company's clients. And that has actually rubbed me the wrong way, where it seems like they're trying to fool me into making me think that they have these clients, but they're actually, backgrounds of the team. So as long as things like that are not portrayed in the wrong way.
That's a good point too. You want to be super honest and transparent and not act like, the logos that are on there are your customers.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
Exactly.
Lucas, can you hear me better now by any chance? Thanks for calling that out. Let me know. I was actually going to add one more thing and a question. Matt, with PLG companies going into enterprise, I see this, and Dropbox did this too in the early days, where I was like, oh, you probably shouldn't put Disney's logo on your website, if you don't have an enterprise contract. But some folks were like, well, Peter, like we have users there, so we should put them as customers, right? So that's something that has come to bite me actually in the sales cycle. So I wonder what you think about that, because a lot of these impressive PLG companies, even in the early days have tons of users, but they don't have like enterprise proof points, right? So I think it's kind of along the same line of just being transparent about what you have as customers versus users versus your experience, right? But curious what you
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. This is, I know, something that you mention a lot as well, but it's around just honesty. I think, enterprise sales is, first of all, it's a very long process and you're talking to multiple people, but the deals that you create, it's not just like a one-time sale anymore. Some of these can last many, many years. So I think the question that I would ask is whatever decision you're making, are you in any way breaking that trust?
Mm,
Because once
yeah,
that happens, the risk is just not worth it, especially in
sure.
enterprise. Like people know so many other people as well, so word can actually get out. And oftentimes it ends up not being worth it. Like if anything, another workaround is maybe instead of having it on the site, but talking about it in a call where, hey, like we have a few clients that work at so and so company. Um, but
Good
yeah,
point.
maybe if
Yeah.
you're showing the entire enterprise contract, depending on the product, could be tough.
Yeah, like the deck can be different from the website. Yeah,
Yeah,
cool, cool. I
yeah,
like that you guys help clients think about that too. It's not just design, it's about are you being honest and like what are you emitting in terms of your values. So, anyways, I don't
exactly.
want to derail the content because I know you have a lot of other good stuff here coming up.
No, these are super, super good points. So yeah, the other one is social proof, and then the other one is showing the product in action. So this is one where, especially with AI, it's getting easier and easier to create motion and animation. And this is something that we also invest pretty heavily at Zipsy for our customers. But ideally, if you can show how the product works, or even better, if you can get them to jump on a trial or do some sort of product demo, it massively de-risks the decision from the customer side, right? Like they're essentially being able to test it out without any risk. So I think as I go through, I'll show some examples as well. Um,
I'm glad that you brought that up too because I see a lot of companies with Loom videos on the homepage,
yeah,
where it looks like not very highly produced. So the fact that
yeah,
there are AI tools that can help you show motion without it looking like you're in your bedroom just recording at 10 p.m., right? I think is a step above and something that you should think about on the enterprise side.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Here's actually one where with Figma, if you go to the homepage, it's just showing all this animation, and you can immediately understand. Okay, this is a tool where you can do very advanced design stuff, but you can see all the different users working together, which obviously for Figma was a big piece of what they do. So something like this is even a great way to get people to quickly understand. And then, as you can imagine, you go down, you're going to start seeing, all the social proof as well. So they're obviously doing well in those two things I just mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah, and by the way, Figma had some of this motion in the early days too. Obviously now they're a much larger company, but like Matt was saying, there's tools now that can help you mimic some of these things without paying an agency too much.
Yeah.
Unless it's Zipsy, then yeah, you should pony up.
It's
Anyways,
okay.
yeah,
Well,
keep
we're
keep
we're using these AI tools too, so it's great.
yeah, yeah, cool, cool.
Um, and then lastly, it's prove that it's worth the switch. So integrating into enterprise companies is often quite complex. So obviously there's the complicated infrastructure, but sometimes even just being, let's say even a contractor, there's a whole process to get you onboarded into their system. But then not only that, there is, multiple people, as I mentioned, using your product. So changing habits and routines of what maybe 200 people currently do in that team can be very complicated too. So leadership is already thinking of all those things as they're considering different solutions. So often if your product is just 10% better, it's usually, it's often not even worth it. The other side to that though is if that 10% results in very significant dollar amounts, then that is a different story. But the way that I would think about, not even just portraying your value prop and designs, but even as you're building your company is how can your solution be significantly better than the alternative? So here's a really good example from Deal where as I was going through the process, it's, spend 51% less time onboarding global employees, right? And this is actually exactly what we talked about in the previous slide, where first of all, that first header copy is very easy to understand, whether it's someone in leadership or whether it's someone that's very technical. Like they can very clearly understand because the wording is simple and clear. But then you have a very obvious value prop, right? It's 51% less time. That sounds significantly better than our current process. So just by looking at this, you have a sense of how the value can be created for using Deal. And I'm sure they'll have all the different documents to go into the different types of countries, the legal processes, but they just don't talk about that here because like they just don't need to go into the technicalities. And then the other thing that I definitely want to mention is optimize your user journey. So I've seen some companies where it's very good to actually start with self-serve because as people get onto their self-serve platforms, they slowly convert into the more enterprise offers. I've also seen other companies where their main goal is to just talk to sales. Like you need to have a demo and talk to sales, and they realize that that is their main key touch point and aha moment to get you to actually sign with them. So they'll skip the self-serve process entirely. So my recommendation here is to optimize your designs to best fit with your product or industry. So here's an example.
As you're pulling up an example, can I ask you a question about
Yeah.
like here, Figma actually is a great example what you're on. They have both, right? They have both contact
Mm.
sales and get started for free. So do you run across those situations quite a bit? I have a client right now that has done really well with PLG, and now they want to make a splash in enterprise. So I'm sure it's really hard to think about those competing priorities, right? Especially if one starts as like a pet project and starts to gain traction.
Yeah. So I'd say Figma in this case has both, but the way that it's designed, it's very much leaning towards getting people to use the product first.
Mm,
Like the priority, even in the call to action, is get started as opposed to contact sales, which is almost hidden. It's not as obvious. But then when you look into an example like, let's actually go to Deal, everything's around book a demo. There's no trial, right? Like they don't advertise for that at all. In
hmm
fact, something interesting with Deal is if I click on get a demo, it shows this page. But then if I go to speak to sales, I think it's actually the exact same page. So
Mm.
I think
Yeah,
they
yeah.
understand that
That's
there's,
interesting.
yeah. So I think for them, they understand that, trial's not a thing that's important for them. It's to get the customer on a call. Like that by far has the strongest conversion.
Hmm
Um, Now to answer your question, I think that there are different ways that you can handle it. Like I've seen some companies where, unlike Figma, where it's a little bit more obvious that getting started is the call to action, I've seen some where they have actually both. Um, I'd say at the end of the day, that really depends on the company.
Yep, yep. Makes sense. Makes sense. What are your thoughts on like speaking of other call to actions? Because we have so many early stage founders. I think some founders also are in this get on the wait list phase, right?
Mm,
Or um, that's the primary thing I see if you're pre-launch. Like, what do you
mm.
think about that compared to like maybe another way to build the funnel, like join the newsletter or download this guide, right? As like a first call to action. I'm curious, like if you have suggested or executed or seen some of these things and your thoughts on different ways outside of get started for free and contact sales.
Yeah, I would say that if you're so early and you don't have any product to show yet, I think collecting some level of information so that you can get in touch with them is the best. So that could be in the form of a newsletter. I think waitlist is probably a little bit stronger than that.
Hmm.
But yeah, collecting some sort of information. I would say that as you're getting closer to that actual launch phase as well, a very underrated but obvious thing is just schedule a call with some of those customers. See how they actually use the product.
Hmm.
Because if you're that early, it's almost less about selling, but understanding how people are using and finding value in what you're building.
That's a really good point. Yeah, there's so many people who treat the wait list as like one moment of a launch,
Yeah,
right? But you should talk to 10 people on that wait list, right? That's such a good piece of advice. Awesome.
yeah,
Sorry, I think you
exactly.
were going to show another example and I kind of derailed you. Or maybe it was Figma.
Uh, oh yeah, it was Deal. Um,
hmm
But then there's one more piece that I want to share is around integrations. So this is one where, yeah, with a lot of enterprises, they're just connected to so many different things, and this is a very obvious, it's like a check mark. So if we're connected to some sort of contract tool or some sort of like analytics tool, but your product doesn't integrate with it, like even though I really like what you're building, I might say, hey, like we just can't right now. Can you come back when you have it? Or yeah, this is a blocker for us, and you're kind of out of the deal. If you guys do have integrations, and it's a very important part of what you're building, I would say, yeah, definitely bring this up. Put this as part of the process so that it reduces that complexity in actually getting you onboarded. Mm, I think
That's so
Monday,
important to highlight. Actually, every single enterprise deal I've closed, the ecosystem conversation has been like a table stakes part of the process, right? And the other thing I'll say is, if you don't have certain integrations, but you know they're big, I've seen like the coming soon tag too,
yeah,
to be really good. Just so you don't shut off conversations, right? And they don't think that you're not serious about the ecosystem.
yeah. Like, I agree. Like sometimes what you can even do if you're so early stage, like you have to be very scrappy and you can't build everything beforehand. If someone asks you about an integration, you don't have it, you could just say it's coming soon and then quickly turn around and build that as soon as possible.
Yeah, when your first customer asks for it, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
totally,
yeah.
totally. And coming soon for some enterprises is like in a quarter, which I know is a different kind of speed than startups are used to.
Yeah. It's a good way to commit to something before actually building it. I think for early stage startups, that's actually a better strategy instead of delaying things for too long. Um, Yeah, and I think Monday.com is one where they just have an entire integrations page. What I like about them is they also show examples of how some of these integrations already work as well, so you can envision, what
Mm,
that would be like. Um, and then yeah, again, like video assets to show, or like animations to show how that actually works. But yeah, they did a good job of kind of going through some of the examples that I shared. And then yeah, here's their
amazing.
case of like, don't see one, we'll get it in there.
Yeah, yeah, this is great. Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Do
Yeah,
you have a couple more slides? I forget. I know I thumbed through the deck, but
nope, that's it.
perfect. That was awesome. Really appreciate you going super tactical around pieces of advice and letting me interrupt you here and there. Let's open it up for the last like 10 or so minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, to founders or whoever else is on the call for specific questions you might have for Matt and the Zipsy team. They work with early stage founders 24/7. So would love to see if there's any questions that come up from the presentation or just something that we didn't cover even. So feel free to chat it into the live stream chat. I have one actually, Matt, to start us off with that I was reminded of when you were showing Monday. How do you think about pricing design, if that makes sense? Because that is like, I mean, I think it's kind of related to what I was talking about with PLG and enterprise, but also a lot of founders are thinking about pricing too.
Yeah.
So how do you think about that page, right, as it's evolving and how to actually display it in a clear way? Yeah, would love your thoughts on just pricing in general and pricing design.
Yeah, so I'd say there's a couple examples that I want to share. So let's actually go back to, can you see Beehive?
Oh yeah, yep.
So Beehive is one where, interestingly, like, you would think that their newsletter platform is one where they want you to get started as soon as possible, but you'll see automatically their main key call to action is get a demo,
Yeah,
right?
that is interesting actually because it feels so self-servy. Like I use
Yeah,
Beehive and just got started basically.
yeah. I have a feeling it's because they want to move a little bit more upmarket into more of their enterprise features and enterprise customers.
Hmm.
Um, what I like about their pricing is that it's very customizable. So already you can see, if I have X number of subscribers, what does that look like? Um, I know there's some products where they'll have like that, the thing that you can drag and it'll show you how much it would cost for your organization. So this is one way where for pricing, you can make it a little bit more specific to the person that's looking at your pricing page. But the other method, I feel, when you go into more and more like upmarket and more enterprise deals, is they will just not show pricing at all. So if they go back to Deal, actually no, Deal does have, but there are definitely some orgs where they just don't show any pricing and they say, let's jump on a call. And I feel like that is usually a good process depending on what you're building, so that they can just talk to you directly, and the pricing is often going to be very custom anyways. So that's one thing that I see. But then the irony of it too is for early stage startups, you probably don't know what your pricing is. Like it could be 10K a month, but it could also be like 40K a month, and you're just in that price discovery phase. So it's hard to list a price directly onto your page. So I would say if you're an early stage company, like the best thing is to just jump on a call with them, understand who's actually coming to your site, what price is available. So I'd say that would be my tip for early stage companies. In fact, one of our clients, their key strategy was show as much social proof as possible, like the logos of customers that they had, and just really get them to just jump on a call. Like those are like the two key priorities that they had. And they absolutely crushed it. So depending on the industry.
That's a good point. Yeah. And kind of to your point around website and deck being different, like I always tell founders, like have an opinion on pricing, even on the first call, even if you don't have a customer yet. But you can always put that in the deck, right? So you anchor on something that can evolve too.
Yeah.
So that's good advice. What other questions do folks have who are in the audience? Feel free to put them in the chat. We'll also obviously share this recording as well as Matt's information after the call too, if there's like a specific one-on-one question you want to ask. But yeah, would love to see if there's any other questions outside of the one that I just asked. Anything here? Any thoughts? Okay, so Prachir, hey Prachir, good to see you. What does a process of engaging with Zipsy look like? Awesome. We're getting a little sales pitch here. I'll give you feedback after you give the pitch.
Perfect. Good feedback session. Hey, Prachir. So basically what it looks like with Zipsy is, so I'll talk about our process and then what you can expect from, let's say, just working with Zipsy. So we'll have that first initial call. So that for us is when we get a much better understanding of the customer, what they do, what they're building, some of the opportunities that we see, and whether they're actually a good fit for us and vice versa. Second call, often we'll have a strategy call. So we'll probably bring our design directors, give recommendations immediately on their current site and assets. And that's our way of, let's give first. Like we may not even be working yet and they may not end up working with us, but if we have really good advice and we can just give that to them, that's awesome. So we'll often have that sort of strategy call. And then third call is, to actually go through the process and proposal. Now, for Zipsy, we have two different types of sprints, and we work in the sprint model. So one is the entire brand and website. So we've worked with companies that have had no logo, no website, and we've built everything from their designs, their website, we deployed their website, and we've also done massive rebrands too. And then the second sprint is around the product. So we've done product design, interface design, and we've also built products as well with our engineering team. So depending on what's needed, we'll create a custom sprint for them.
That's awesome. I love what you said about free advice there. To actually like give something of value before folks engage with you. I think that's like a great model. Something I try to do even in my intro calls, right? Like, can I give at least like one tip on sales process? So
yeah,
appreciate that, Matt. And you've already given a ton of free value for this webinar, so you're doing great. It was a good pitch. I give you 10 out of 10. Okay, so Matt has a question. If we have one product that supports multiple customer profiles, PE, exec search firms, exec coaching groups, would you recommend making the landing page more general or funneling people to different, more specific pages based on industry profile? I love this question. Yeah, because your product messaging can be clear, but you have different personas that are very different, right? Exec coaching groups are different from PE. So yeah, curious to get your thoughts, Matt.
Yeah. So the Main answer is it depends. Obviously, depending on your product. But here's some very interesting things that I've seen lately. So number one, we obviously saw a lot of versions where there's customers tab and you'll see all the different types of customer segments. And you can go into like search firms or executive coaching groups and you can actually go click through. That is one where it is very clear and obvious. If you have a product where you can actually clearly tell that message in one place, in fact, if one of your key benefits is to actually connect all of those groups, let's say, then maybe it's actually better to put that onto the homepage. But if they're very distinct, separate customer profiles, I lean towards separating those groups. Now, one thing that's very interesting with AI and just like advancements of search and search is making a custom page depending on where users are coming from. So if they're coming from a blog that you wrote that's talking about executive coaching, then maybe it leads them to that specific page, or maybe your homepage now actually talks about executive coaching, right? Like there's ways to actually adjust that now. So that's a little bit more of an advanced way that I've seen a couple companies start to experiment with.
Very cool. I like that. Yeah. And I guess the assumption there then is that you are also investing a ton in content, right? And having content be the jumping off point to your website versus somebody like Google searching you, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Or
like that.
even like Google search, if they're coming in through Google search, you could see what keywords they're coming in through.
Good point. Good point. Yeah. That's really, really good. Anything outside of them putting in your website address, right? You can actually control the message even on the homepage.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And
Okay. Hopefully that helps, Matt. Yeah. So the customer tab, I do like that too, because then it makes it really clear like what industries you're supporting. And then kind of what I was saying around like coming soon, like I've seen some companies put the like coming soon for industries too, right? That are peripheral, right? So let's say like you're working on something that is going to be good for exec coaching groups, but you don't have it yet. You could have like a separate page where you're still bringing in that funnel. Right?
Yeah.
So cool. That's a great question. Appreciate that, Matt. Kaz put a mutiny actually as an example.
I think that's the one I saw actually.
Oh, cool. Okay. Around like kind of differing how the homepage is, right? Based off where you're coming from. Cool. So yeah,
Super
check
cool.
out Mutiny. Amazing. Tanny has a question. With so many agentic AI tools, platforms these days, what do you think the most successful AI startups have done to simplify messaging surrounding their core product? Sometimes a solution/platform seems to get lost in the AI and vice versa. It's a great question. Yeah, everybody's AI now, right? So how do you differentiate yourself?
So that's an interesting one. Funny enough, I think we're currently at a stage where the AI piece isn't necessarily simplifying the message. I feel like I've actually seen more companies where their messaging actually gets a little bit more complicated with AI, because what that does is, first of all, it might actually create a different sort of product than what your core product offering is. So now you're getting more and more products that you have to talk about. Or you might have to like change your core narrative to be about AI. And if you're not used to doing that, now that messaging is actually getting a little confusing. And then worst is when people are just using AI to create the copywriting. And I'd say right now, AI is not quite there yet to create like excellent top level copy. So it actually gets a little bit more confusing. But yeah, I would actually say that I've actually seen the opposite problem. So if you can tell a good narrative of what you're doing and simplify it, then you actually stand out a little bit more than some of these other AI companies that are still in that exploratory phase.
Yeah, Tanny, let us know if that helps answer your question. And if, by the way, if you all want to put in your website so that like Matt takes a look, like we can also look at a tangible example too. Yeah, exactly.
That's a good idea.
So I don't know, Tanny, if you're thinking about your website and you want to pop it in, but happy to kind of expound upon that. Jonathan has a question. We're working on an accelerator program powered by brand sponsorship as a solution to cultural marketing, but we need our first round of sponsors to launch. How do you recommend framing that if we don't have proof of concept, since we need the initial sponsors for proof of concept?
I see. So at such an early stage thing like that, I'd say a good reference is if you guys know Sam Parr, he hosted something called the Hustle Conference. And it's similar in that it's sort of like this live event, but he really hacked his way into getting speakers to his events. I think he just started talking to many people at once and was like, hey, I'm currently talking to the founder of this company, they're thinking of speaking. And as soon as someone says yes, he'll go to everybody at once and say, hey, this person just confirmed we have 3 seats left. Do you want to be one of those spots? So it does involve a little bit of like hacking and like really, honestly, it's kind of a hustle and grind to like be talking to everyone. But I'd say, you know, if you can talk, like I'd say design would come in a way of you show like the professional level of what you're doing and the messaging is clear of what it's for. But I'd say at that early stage where you don't have any sort of social proof, you almost have to create that social proof and create that demand yourself.
Yeah, yeah, it could be like your background, maybe what you've done prior to building your company. I think that's part of it. And I think one other thing you mentioned, Matt, is creating like scarcity. So you could say, hey, we're only launching with X number of sponsors. So you got to kind of like get on this and create that sense of FOMO. Um, awesome. Appreciate it. Well, can we take like 2 minutes each of these websites, Matt Kim? So
Yeah,
Matt
yeah.
Cooper put in his website, Encor.ai. If you could share your screen and kind of give your thoughts on maybe just the top fold. And then Tanny also put in his website. I think it'd be cool to get your quick, like 1 minute feedback on each of these since we're running low on time here.
Yeah, let me see.
This looks really good to me, but I'm not a designer. But Matt, this looks awesome.
Let me see.
Maybe one thing you
Okay.
like and one thing you don't like.
Okay. One thing I like.
I could see Matt's like brain, like he's like looking at everything. He's trying to be detail oriented.
You caught me. You caught me.
Yeah. You're like, where do I start? Anyways, yeah, one thing you like, one thing that could use work.
Yeah, one actually, there's a couple of things that I like. First of all, I really like this logo. I love the simplicity of it. I think the call to action is actually very obvious. And my sense from this image is okay, they do some level of collecting inputs from multiple places. The product does something and you get some kind of nice output. Like that's the key thing that I see here. I think when I first glance at this, I'm not gonna go and look at all the details, but that's like the sense that I'm getting from this image. Um, I'd say the tough thing is if I'm looking at this for 2 seconds, I'm gonna be reading this header, and then I'm gonna be reading this H2 header. And just by looking at those two, I don't actually know what this company does.
Hmm.
I'd say like only when I actually go to here, I'm like, oh, is this actually about executive coaching?
Hmm.
Um, but then like
Yeah,
I
the
st
impact isn't quite there, right? Like, what is assessment intelligence really?
yeah, the impact, but I'd say it's more of clarity of what they do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like if it is about executive coaching, um, like is it like I actually don't know. Is it an AI executive coach right now? Is it executive coach that use AI tools, or is it for people that are executive coaches?
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think it is for people who are executive coaches. I've spoken to Matt a few months ago, so I know, and inspired by his mom actually, who was spending a
Mm,
lot of time just pouring over notes over for her clients, and so they help automate some of the analysis around it and like the output of providing 360 feedback and ensuring that you're providing the best experience for your clients. But yeah, I agree. Like encapsulating some version of that into the top fold probably is a helpful thing to think through.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. So Matt Cooper, reach out to Matt Kim, and you guys can continue that chat. Let's go to
Yeah, let's definitely chat
let's
more.
go to Vibranium, and then I think Prachir, you put in your website. We might not have enough time for yours, but let's do Vibranium, and then Prachir, happy to connect you with Matt afterwards too.
Mm.
And I know we're putting you on the spot to go quickly on this, Matt. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, this is good. So this one, I would say very clear. Like I looked at this and I see it as, okay, it's almost like we're hiring an AI to be essentially like an engineer. Um, I'd imagine slightly different than Copilot, where this engineer can actually do a lot of the work. Like this real-time AI assistant, like reinforces that in my mind. Um, I like this. It's very, value focused of, what exactly am I getting out of this? Okay, we boost efficiency. Mm, I would say the one thing that can improve here is all the imagery from above the fold and all the ones down here is quite complex. Like I like that you actually took some of these assets and you didn't just take a screenshot, but I'd say one way to level that up is, can we actually zoom in further on exactly what the AI did? Or even better, can we animate how this AI actually works? I feel like that's one really strong point of AI and like the magical aha moment of, oh, like I told it to do this and it actually just went ahead and did it. If it can show that in a quick animation, then I feel like the customer would feel that aha moment a little bit faster. Um,
Yeah, I
yeah,
agree. It's hard for me to like actually pinpoint what's going on in these screenshots. I would also say like it does feel a little bit like a feature dump. Like the headlines are actually feature one, feature two,
yeah,
feature three. I feel like that's a little bit of waste of space. I'd want to know like, okay, what is this actually driving, right? It's not about the features, it's about the solutions. So
yeah,
that's just kind
yeah.
of my like non-design eye giving you feedback as well, Tanny. Um,
That's a good point.
Prachir, are you still here? Matt, can you go over 5 minutes
Yeah,
or
yeah.
like 2 minutes? Prachir, if you're still here, just say hello and we can go into Jigsaw ML actually. Okay, perfect. All right, let's do 2 minutes on Prachir.
Hmm. So I would say that it feels a little vague. Like my sense is that this company is a little bit newer, and actually, let me actually double check. Okay, yeah. So my sense is this company is a little bit newer because some of the things that are being mentioned feels a little bit more conceptual. Um, like our vision is almost indicating to me of like this is where we want to go, as opposed
Mm,
to here is what we've built and how you can use it.
mm,
Um,
that's a good point. Yeah. I know
yeah.
Prachir is figuring out his B2B motion. Um, he's like one of the founding engineers at Pinecone, so he has a lot of credibility
Mm,
there, actually. And he has a product that's free, right? Which is why he has that product tab.
yeah.
But yeah, I think what you're saying is like the social proof isn't really there.
Yeah. Like it feels like I don't know exactly what I'm signing up for yet. It feels like the header copy feels strong. Like cloud intelligence, I feel like there's a lot of customers in that space. They're all probably looking for something AI as well. But even this part, when it says Jigsaw ML sits on top of your cloud, it's like, how exactly is it doing this? Like I feel like I'm left with a few more questions.
Yeah, and like what is it driving, right? Is it like saving you on costs? Like what is it,
Yeah,
right? The
yeah,
other
yeah.
thing
What
too,
is it?
like
Yeah.
just what I'm seeing, if you scroll up, I think like I don't know what you think, but the right side, it doesn't tell me much if you go to the top of the fold.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and then the supported by it sees like AWS and Azure. Those are almost like I feel like logos that are too big, maybe, where like a lot of folks could say AWS and Azure. And I don't know if you mean like it integrates or if there's investors from there, but supported by also feels vague. Like how are they supporting you? So yeah, those are some things I would think about.
Yeah,
Cool,
yeah.
Matt. Well, appreciate it. You just gave feedback on three cool companies here, and yeah, please do for those of you who are still remaining, reach out to Matt. I'm gonna put his LinkedIn profile again, they work with designers or founders 24/7 on design concepts, and really appreciate this session, Matt, because you were able to organically, I think, piece the sales component to design, which I think is so critical in trust building. So really, really thank you, Matt. I've learned a ton. We'll hopefully do this again at some point. But again,
Do
for
it.
everyone who stayed, I think Matt already mentioned there's an offer to just chat with you guys about your kind of design journey. And so I would definitely take advantage of it because they're the best of the best. So thanks
Yeah,
again, Matt.
sounds good. This was fun. Thanks for having me. I'll send you actually one of the ebooks that we created on logos and making good design for logos.
Nice. I didn't
You can
realize you
share
had
with
that.
your community.
Great, great. We'll definitely do that. All right, Matt. Appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, everyone.